Well, there's nothing like a cost of living crisis to put pressure on your credit.
With the latest economic figures revealing Australia is on the brink of returning to a per capita.
Vulnerable Australians are feeling the brunt of the cost of living crisis, often going hungry.
Good evening. It was a dire situation and then an explosive escalate.
Commerce and Industry, Andrew McKellar, says Australian businesses will be affected.
What if I told you that one of the world's wealthiest nations, sitting on a treasure trove of natural resources, is slowly pricing out an entire generation from home ownership? I'm talking about Australia, the so-called lucky country that's becoming anything but lucky for millions of its citizens. Let me paint you a picture. Australia has experienced one of the longest economic growth streaks in modern history, 28 years without a recession before COVID hit. But here's the crazy part. Despite this incredible run, the average Australian today is worse off than their parents were at the same age. Can you imagine? For decades, Australia built its economy on a simple formula. Dig stuff out of the ground, ship it to China, and watch the money roll in. Mining booms, property speculation, and a services sector propped up by immigration. It worked until it didn't. Fast forward to today, and they're looking at an economy that's fundamentally broken. The housing market has gone completely through the roof, wages have stagnated, and cost of living is crushing ordinary families. But here's where things get really interesting. This isn't just a recent problem. These cracks have been forming for years, and now they're becoming impossible to ignore. Let's start with the big one, housing. Australia's property market isn't just expensive. It's become completely detached from economic reality. The median house price in Sydney is now over $1.3 million. In Melbourne, it's $1 million. Think about that for a second. $1 million for a basic family home. Here's the math that'll blow your mind. In 1990, the average Australian home cost about 3 times the median household income. Today, they're talking 8.2 times in Sydney and 7.1 times in Melbourne, according to the latest Demographia International Housing Affordability Survey. That's not a market adjustment. That's a complete system failure. For context, anything above 5.1 times income is considered severely unaffordable. The numbers get even more brutal when you look at what this means for buyers. A typical Sydney house now requires a deposit of $260,000. That's more than the median annual household income of $94,000. At current savings rates, it would take the average household 34 years just to save for a deposit. 34 years. So what happened? Well, it's a perfect storm of terrible policy decisions. First, you've got negative gearing, a tax policy that essentially subsidizes property speculation. Australian taxpayers fork out $2.8 billion annually in negative gearing tax breaks, with 70% of that benefit flowing to the top 20% of income earners. Then there's the capital gains tax discount, which costs another $11.7 billion per year, making property investment even more attractive than actually productive businesses. Talk about backwards incentives. But wait, there's more. Australia's population has been growing at breakneck speed through immigration. They've added 518,000 people in 2022-23 alone, the largest increase on record. But guess what? They haven't been building enough homes to keep up. They're completing around 180,000 new dwellings annually, but they need at least 240,000 to meet demand. It's supply and demand 101, and they've been failing at both sides of the equation. The human cost is staggering. They've got teachers, nurses, and police officers, essential workers, who can't afford to live in the communities they serve. Young people are giving up on home ownership entirely, stuck in a rental market that's equally broken. Average rent in Sydney? Over $650 a week for a house, $550 for a unit. For a basic apartment? Now, expensive housing might be bearable if wages were keeping pace. Spoiler alert, they're not. Real wages in Australia have been virtually flat for over a decade, while productivity has increased by 1.5% annually since 2010. Real wages have grown by just 0.7% per year. Instead, all that extra value has flowed to corporate profits and asset prices. Here's a stat that'll make your blood boil. CEO pay in ASX 200 companies averaged $4.2 million in 2023, up 23% from the previous year, while average worker pay increased by just 3.7%. The minimum wage? At $23.23 per hour, it's been consistently eroded by inflation, leaving low-income workers even further behind. A full-time minimum wage worker earns $48,000 annually, barely enough to rent a one-bedroom apartment in most capital cities. But here's the really insidious part. Australia's entire economic model depends on keeping wages low to maintain competitiveness. They've created a system where workers are told to accept less so that businesses can stay profitable. It's a race to the bottom, and guess who's winning? Here's a crisis that's flying under the radar. Australia is aging fast, and it's not having enough babies to replace itself. Their fertility rate has plummeted to just 1.58 births per woman, well below the 2.1 replacement rate needed for a stable population. That's the lowest it's been since records began in 1976. Meanwhile, the proportion of Australians aged 65 and over has jumped from 13% in 2007 to 17.3% today, and it's projected to hit 23% by 2047. Think about what this means. Fewer working-age people supporting more retirees. The dependency ratio, the number of people aged 65 plus per 100 people of working age, is set to double from 26 today to 42 by 2060. This demographic shift is already crushing their healthcare and aged care systems. They're spending $220 billion annually on health. That's 11% of GDP and growing. Aged care alone costs $36 billion per year, and that's set to explode as the baby boomers age. But here's the kicker. They're not training enough workers to care for them, and they can't afford to pay the ones they have properly. Housing and wages are just the tip of the iceberg. Everything in Australia is expensive, and I mean everything. Groceries have increased by 9.2% in the past year alone. Fuel prices hit record highs of over $2.20 per liter in 2022. Electricity prices have surged by 25% in some states, adding $600 annually to the average household bill. Take electricity prices. Australia has some of the world's most abundant energy resources, yet they also have some of the world's highest electricity prices, averaging 28.9 cents per kilowatt hour compared to 13.1 cents in the US. How does that make sense? It doesn't, unless you understand that they've privatized and financialized their entire energy system, turning a basic necessity into a profit center. Childcare is another disaster. Australian families pay an average of $144 per day for childcare, some of the highest costs in the developed world. For a family with 2 children in full-time care, that's $75,000 annually before government subsidies. It's economic madness that destroys productivity and perpetuates inequality, effectively forcing one parent, usually the mother, out of the workforce. But here's the really scary part. Australia's economy has become increasingly financialized. Instead of investing in productive businesses, innovation, or infrastructure, they poured money into property speculation and financial engineering. Their major banks are essentially property lending institutions. About 62% of their $3.2 trillion in total lending goes to residential property, not to businesses, not to productive investment, but to bidding up house prices. Business lending accounts for just 22% of bank credit, compared to 40% in Germany and 35% in the US. Total household debt in Australia now stands at $2.7 trillion. That's 186% of GDP, one of the highest ratios in the world. The average mortgage is $635,000, requiring monthly repayments of $3,800 at current interest rates. With the Reserve Bank raising rates from 0.1% to 4.35%, mortgage stress is affecting 1.4 million households. This financialization has made the economy incredibly fragile. When property prices wobble, the entire financial system shakes. They've built their prosperity on a foundation of debt and speculation, and that's not sustainable. While unemployment sits at a relatively low 3.7%, the quality of jobs is deteriorating. Casual and part-time employment now accounts for 40% of all jobs, up from 30% in the 1990s. Underemployment, people working fewer hours than they want, affects 6.3% of the workforce, or 900,000 people. Manufacturing employment has collapsed from 1.3 million jobs in 1990 to just 850,000 today, despite population growth of 50%. Construction employment is volatile, swinging from 1.2 million jobs at the peak of the mining boom to 950,000 during the downturn. Meanwhile, low productivity service jobs in retail, hospitality, and administration have grown rapidly. The gig economy has exploded, with 1.1 million Australians now working as independent contractors. But these jobs typically lack security, benefits, or career progression. Uber drivers earn an average of $21 per hour before expenses, below the minimum wage once vehicle costs are factored in. Australia stands at a crossroads. They can continue down the current path, watching inequality grow, housing become more unaffordable, and our economy become more fragile. Or they can choose a different direction. The question isn't whether Australia can afford to change, it's whether they can afford not to. The longer they wait, the harder it becomes to fix these problems. The social and economic costs are mounting and time is running out. But here's the thing, Australia has faced existential challenges before and come through stronger. They have the resources, the talent, and the institutions to build a better economic model. What they need is the political will to take on the vested interests and make the hard choices. The lucky country's luck hasn't run out, but it's time to stop relying on luck and start building an economy that works for everyone, not just the privileged few. What do you think? Can Australia fix its broken economy, or are they destined to become a cautionary tale of squandered opportunity? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. They're your go-to source for what's really happening in the world of economics and politics.